when you start carrying the burden and feeling complicit or responsible in all this big government, big corporations, big cities, it wears you out emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The next thing you know, you don't have a good radiant outlook. We can feel like that we have aided and abetted a lot of the problems. All my life I've been, drinking Coke, and now I don't, but I finance them. All right, well, it's okay. Repent, it's done, and leave it and go forward. That's the way to proceed. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Beyond Labels podcast with your hosts, Joel Salatin, the farmer, and Dr. Sina McCullough, our favorite researcher. We love letters from listeners, and we have one that kind of it's an emotional one from one of our listeners, Shasheen Borelli. Thank you for writing us, and thank you for being this transparent. And so she writes. She says, "I've been immersed in the podcast, and I found myself working 14-hour days, stocking shelves at Fred Meyer in 2020, just trying to feed our community, whatever got delivered to our store. Didn't have enough energy to do anything else but work. So I decided to reduce down to the current 8 to 9 hours a day. Started learning to cook. I ate out 4 to 5 times a week. When I cooked before 2020, I only did whatever was easiest, and that's it. I've got so much to say, but I'll leave that there. This year, I've grown very tired of this way of life. And so as Sina and I respond to this letter, we're doing so with a couple of ideas, but I think this sentence really captures a lot. This year, I've grown very tired of this way of life. I'm extremely tired of seeing my husband and son sick in various ways, trying to enjoy life through constant sickness. Husband has chronic asthma, organ problems that came later from medications. He doesn't go to the doctor anymore and deals with asthma attacks daily. My son has chronic eczema and is allergic to many foods. This year, I started researching how to grow my own food and am now diving into medicinal herbs. So, she's being proactive. So her 2 questions. Number one is, my big question for you is, how can we as people of a nation end big government, big corporation, and big cities? Just how can we end it all? That's number one. And number 2 is how do you start big things? For example, she's interested in a new way of schooling, for example, for her son. Is there a way to just start something like that? And how do you start something you don't know anything about? Marketing and government rules and all that. How do you start a big thing? She's not talking about starting a little thing. She's obviously got, Shasheen, good on you for starting small things, like you're diving into medicinal herbs. That's a good thing. That's a small thing, but you're obviously both the questions are ones of they're big issues. It's magnitude. It's how do we stop, big government, and how do we start big things? And so with that in mind, Sina has some feedback that we'll start the conversation with. But again, thanks for the question. And we're always love to hear from our listeners.
Yes, thank you. I love these questions. These are big questions, as Joel said. And so I want to start with this because of that same line that Joel talked about, where she said that basically she's just tired of it. She's tired of this way of life. Joel and I can both appreciate that it can be very frustrating and very overwhelming, to live this way, to lead a clean life is what we would call it, to be a food activist. It can be very daunting and overwhelming. And when she's talking about the sickness in her family, that really resonates with me because, as you know, I've been there, right? Not only myself, but each of my family members has gone through a devastating sickness that we've recovered from. So we're going to get into this question about how do you end the big government, big corporations, and big cities? But what I want to say first is I think that the most important starting part is to start with yourself. So we can look out and see, oh my goodness, there's all this stuff wrong, stuff that the government's doing, the big bad corporations are doing all this stuff, all this junk that's in our food supply. Like, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't want to deal with it anymore. I don't even know where the first step is. And my advice would be, because there's sickness in the home and you're feeling anxious, I would stop focusing on the external. Instead, I would focus on the self first, followed by the family. And I know that it, even as I say that order out loud, it even kind of rubs me the wrong way, because especially as women, we're in essence taught to care for others first at the sake of ourselves. But as somebody who's been through it with sick family members and sickness herself, it has to start from you. It's like being in the airplane and you've got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then your child. It's uncomfortable, but that's the order you have to do it, so you have the strength and the energy and the clarity of mind to help the family. So what I would say first is, you are actually a walking billboard, right? And so you have to ask yourself, what is it that your billboard is advertising? And so when I am, people will ask me all the time, like, how do you talk to other people to convince them that they need to eat a certain way, to be healthy or to help our food supply, right? And my response is, I don't convince people. Like, that's not my goal. My goal is not to walk around and be lecturing to people about how to eat a certain way. Even if they're sick, I do not just sit there and say, eat this way, and then you'll be healthy. Like, why won't you do it? Like, that's not what I do.
Sina, that's such a great, people have always asked me, how many farmers have you convinced to go, non-chemical?
Yeah.
And when I speak at conferences, I ask the room, how many of you have convinced somebody to go non-chemical? I've never had a single hand raised, ever. We come ourselves, we come individually when that final drop hits our head and we say, okay, now I've got to do something different. And you're so right on. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with the work of Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. For me, next to the Bible, that's probably the most influential book that I ever read, and refer to it all the time. And one of the 7 habits is what he calls the sphere of influence. And what he says is that your sphere of influence grows the less time you spend fixated on things that are outside your sphere of influence. Mm-hmm. And your sphere of influence contracts the more attention you put on things that are outside your sphere of influence. So he has these 3 concentric circles, and your sphere of influence, and obviously the number 1 influence you can influence is you. That's your tightest sphere of influence. And so if you get that really functional, then it radiates outward. You never get inward radiance by spending all your time focused on stuff that's outside your sphere of influence.
That's exactly right. Exactly my point is that I don't have to actually try to convince people to eat healthy, right? I don't have to sit there and lecture to them about it, because it's like they said, I mean, talk is cheap. If the person's not ready to hear it, the talk is cheap. It won't resonate with them. And so I live the example, right? I am consciously aware of what my walking billboard is saying. And Joel, I'll give you an example. I've mentioned a little bit of this before, but I will go to, play dates with tons and tons of kids. I've started this homeschool play group, and we meet weekly. Joel, 90 families join this play group. 90 families, right? It's a kids and teens club. This tells you how much we're longing to find a tribe, right? To be connected. Right. So anyhow, I'm at this play date, and I kid you not, it's been months now. We play games, like we played soccer the other day, and we're like, hey, moms versus the kids. only a handful of moms were actually willing to get up there and play. But I kid you not, we held our own, Joel. Like it was like maybe 20 kids on the other side, and then there were like us 5 moms, and we held our own. I was very impressed with us. But my point is, the moms around me, most of them are probably in their somewhere like early 30s, I would say. I'm gonna be 48 this year, and they're like amazed. They're like, I can't even keep up with you. Like, how do you move so fast on the soccer field? You change direction so quickly. You're so agile. Like, you've got so much energy. Like, how are you out there playing with these kids? Like, not just playing in a sandbox, you're running and keeping up with these kids. How are you actually doing this? Okay, that's my entryway. Yep. That's when I'm like, it's the choices that I'm making in my lifestyle. And I leave it at that. I don't sit there and now, oh, blah, let me vomit all this information on you. They are then pulled in to me. Yep. And because they want that too. They want that for themselves. We all want to feel energized and youthful again, right? And so I project it out there, just like you're saying, and the people find me. It's like you project the energy out there and you attract it back to you. So I don't actually have to do anything. So my suggestion, the reason why I'm saying this is because for our listener who wrote this, it does start with you. Even though your family is sick, it starts with the choices that you make, right? You are going to be the influencer for the family. So take care of yourself first, and it will expand out to the family. So the next sphere there is to help the family when they're ready, right? You don't want to force it on them. You help them when they're ready. A lot of people who I've been in contact with that are having health issues, they tend to need to hit rock bottom before they're willing and ready to make changes, like the needed changes. So when they're ready, then you will be modeling a certain type of, energetic imprint, and it will attract them to you, and they'll want that too. So you go self, and then you go family, and then you go local, right? The next would be your sphere of influence with your friends, your neighbors, the church, people at church with you, people you're coming in contact with. So for me, even though on this podcast and in our conversations, Joel, we'll talk about things that are happening on the federal level, right? Because we want to be aware of what's happening so we can navigate the food supply and, send the alert to the troops, to our tribe about this is the, latest thing to avoid or whatnot. So I'm aware of these things that are happening, but I don't focus on them, right? I'm not going to be able to change what the bureaucrats in the FDA are doing. Like, I just know that I'm not going to. And by the way, some people are working on that, like Center for Food Safety. That's a great organization that is trying to protect our food. And you can sign up for their newsletters. They send you news alerts about like, sign this petition to like push back on Congress to do X, Y, and Z. And that's a great way, an easy way. If somebody does want to start helping on the government level, just sign up for their newsletters. It shows up in your inbox. All you do is click a button and you feel accomplished. You did something.
Sure.
That's not my route.
Yeah. Something as simple as signing up for Del Bigtree's High Wire, or Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Defense Fund. There are fantastic organizations out there that you can be a part of, and so you can start feeding. You need to feed your spirit some positive. I mean, if you're, and man, I'll just say, meter in carefully the mainstream media narrative. I mean, between the war in Ukraine, the corruption in the government, don't even start me down that rabbit hole. We can, there are so many things in our culture right now that we can be frustrated about. And it can absorb your time. And I feel, this writer, I feel the burden, but you know what? You didn't make the big government. You didn't make the big corporations. Now, you can defund them. You can defund them for yourself. and look in the mirror and say, hey, I just defunded Monsanto today. I'm pretty cool, you know, and it's okay to have that conversation. Well, actually, we need that conversation, I would say, and encourage yourself in that. But boy, you know, when you start carrying the burden and feeling complicit or responsible in all this big government, big corporations, big cities, you know, it wears you out emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The next thing you know, you've got you're not a happy wife, and and you don't have a good radiant outlook. And so Sina, yeah, I think all of your thoughts here are really good. But you know, we can feel like that we have aided and abetted a lot of the problems. And I meet people all the time, you know, oh, all my life I've been, you know, whatever, you know, drinking Coke, and now I don't, but, you know, I finance them. All right, well, you know, it's okay. Repent, it's done, you know, and leave it and go forward. That's the way to proceed.
Thank you for joining us on Beyond Labels. Our mission with this podcast is to make it accessible to everyone.
But we are behind a paywall because the issues we discuss are often subject to censorship. We've run into that, and so we have an extremely modest paywall to let us have the freedom to discuss the kind of issues we want to discuss in the way we want to discuss them. And you can become a member and enjoy all this content by clicking on the description box below. We look forward to having you join our family.